But yeah, welcome to our last panel for the workshop. I'm very excited to be chairing today. I just wanted to begin quickly with an acknowledgement of country because I am, as kind of Australian practice, and I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I am coming to you live from, which is the Kaurna people, and that sovereignty here was never ceded. This panel, as James has already said, is looking at networks and connections in the modern day. So the kind of meta networks that Rob sort of mentioned yesterday, and we, I think, had a bit of a discussion group about at some point floating around. But hopefully this will be a really great space to think about those different kind of ways of communicating history around games, as well as kind of through them and between different communities and different invested sort of parties. So the format is the same as yesterday's. It's sort of an open roundtable. Panelists are each going to give a short 5 to 10 minute max sort of opening remarks. And then we'll open to questions and we'll have that discussion in this space. So I will introduce each speaker and then they'll each give their remarks. And I'm just going in the order that the bios are on the page. So that means we're beginning with Adam Bierstadt. So welcome. Adam Bierstadt has an MA in Viking and Medieval Norse Studies from the University of Iceland and is working on an MLIS in Cultural History, or Heritage, sorry, from Simmons University. He's interested in the reception of the medieval past throughout time, but especially in new media and games. Adam is also the owner of the channel Ludo History, a cross-platform project that explores the intersection of history and popular culture in the news, film, and video games. And I'll pop a couple of those links as we go in the chat for everyone to follow. So take it away, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tess, for that wonderful introduction. And big thanks to both you and James for helping organize this whole thing. The conversations, I sadly wasn't able to make it yesterday, but the conversations today have been absolutely fabulous. So, if you were here last year, you actually already know me. I was a participant here last year. I'm trained as historian doing medieval Norse literature and environmental history. But more relevantly for this, I'm a Twitch streamer on Ludo History. It's been going for about 2 years now and has been super duper successful, honestly. We recently, at the start of the year, cleared 2,000 followers on Twitch. It's about 1,600 subscribers on YouTube. So overall, I'd say, right, solidly a moderate success, at least by academic measures. That's an enormous audience. But, you know, this time last year, I was mostly complaining about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This year, I've upgraded to complain about both God of War and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So much has changed. Anyway, rather than talk about streaming, I could go on all day about that. So rather than just talk about that, since this is Coding Medieval Worlds and I have a captive audience for a couple minutes, I just want to talk about like something specific about like design and technologies and how basically if we design with Twitch streamers and communities in mind from the beginning, this opens up a whole new avenue of like historical argument that otherwise really can't be explored through games. And so to do that, to talk about the potential, I want to talk about Twitch integrations. So if you can just raise your hand in chat real quick, or some sort of emoji if you already know about that. But basically, it's like a mode on a game that allows Twitch chat to interact with the game's interface. So it's often used to either spawn random events, change the game physics, or in the case of the gladiatorial sim, Domina, it actually will take random names from members of chat and have them fight to the death. And if one of chat refuses to die properly, chat gets to vote on their fate with a thumbs up, thumbs down. Very pop cultural Roman gladiatorial fights. There are a few different ways to do chat integrations, though, but they all offer really different cool historical potentials. So the easiest one for us would be just Domina but medieval. Like, think about like a simple tournament sim where you could do like 1v1s of Twitch chat fighting each other, 3v3, 25v25, big giant melees. The game would run it, participants would be named after members of chat, and then they can bet channel points or something on the results. Super small way to like integrate the audience, the secondary audience experience into the historical framework, but one that's really quite interesting. Another one, though, like in the game Kingdoms and Castles, a very medievalist fantasy one, that's actually pretty fun on its own. It has a Twitch integration mode, is that they let chat vote on various events. After X many minutes, it'll draw an event or two, or as many as the streamer wants, and chat votes on it. One potential in a less medievalist fantasy and a more historically medieval one would be that chat could basically be like weather or environmental or social crises, right? They could be made almost truly random. And this is the cool thing, right? Something game scripts often struggle with is making things properly random. But if you offload that labor onto humans by making Twitch chat be the agent of chaos, you can just go for it. You can really add randomness and severity unlike anything else that can really emulate the almost uncontrollable severity of, say, climate forcing or sea ice events, crop failures, plague, any of that stuff can be made more severe by letting Twitch chat control when it happens. So these are kind of things that already exist in like CK3's narrative events or Yes Your Grace, but really that extra oomph of Twitch chat being the agents is super cool. Twitch and I spent like an hour brainstorming on my channel the other day, and like one thing that was thrown out is right medieval ideas of like angels and demons, incorporeal entities that are fighting to influence the direction of the world. Is Twitch chat voting on events? Right? There's a really nice overlay between the medieval world layer and then this incorporeal representational layer that Twitch chat occupies. Games without Twitch chat can't emulate that in nearly the same way. So just one more example we came up with would be like a variation of that Twitch integration as found in One Troll Army, where Twitch chat gets to control NPCs with basic commands while the streamer is the troll. But imagine like a Paradox-style game in the Holy Roman Empire, where chat can set the AI priorities of different electors. And everyone's trying to get elected emperor, but Twitch chat gets to control what the AI, an individual AI entity prioritizes. And so instead of it being rerolled every 5 years, you can just change it on the fly and make these entities more unpredictable and make negotiations with them that much more tense. So basically, it offloads the complexity of the AI onto people and solves that problem. So we'll just kind of wrap up here. Obviously, there are some risks and challenges. Implementation could be a challenge. There's some really problematic space with diversity. If you're offloading diversity onto something chat controls, that's bad. And it doesn't obviously perfectly replicate medieval mindsets. But that's kind of the theoretical strength, is that it gets closer for a bigger group of people. And these are also obviously not fully fleshed out pitches. I put these together all in about an hour of talking with my own community. But the idea here is just to emphasize the potential and to offer an entire other realm of historical argument. So if you're interested in making historical games, one thing that's really worth doing is talking with streamers, talking with communities, and using us as points of contact to get a sense of what the public is interested in and what historical spaces are able to be designed for by integrating us early and often in the design process. So that's all I've got. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So many different interesting threads that I hope we'll be able to kind of discuss from that. And I can absolutely attest to how awesome Adam's channel is. Everyone should check it out. But moving along to our next panelist for today, Erasmo Rayon is the no-nonsense lead designer of Dream of Darkness and a veteran vampire hunter. If you want to bullshit someone, this is not the man to choose. If you want to get it done or make Konami great again, he's your guy. A master recruiter of great talent, passionate about game design and making a life for himself. One of the first video game designers of Latin America, an SA Institute alumni. So Erasmo, take it away.
Right. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. And well, let's get right into it. I'm here mostly to talk about how we can integrate lessons about history into game design and all sort of different entertaining products. And this story, so to speak, starts when I was very, very, very young. Personally, I didn't really like much about history when I was growing up, mostly because I got bored during history classes. I'm not sure how the rest of the world fares in this category, but for us at least, we have our history textbooks. They are redacted by the Department of Public Education, and they're more like factoid booklets where you just get the important dates, the main characters of different historic events of Mexico. And most people, if you ask them today, they don't really care about the music, about the history of Mexico, the Aztecs, things like that, because it is presented in a very boring way. In fact, moving a little closer to the games industry, there are several efforts meant to gamify learning. And one of the most important examples are educational games. Unfortunately, educational games are not very popular because even though they try to teach you something useful, maybe learn a new language or history, math, or several other different subjects, at the main core they have the problem that these games aren't very fun to begin with. It's extremely difficult to get invested in a game that it's just trying to tell you something in a very academic way. Some people might enjoy that, but in order for us to really take advantage of this entertaining medium, which is video games, we have to make all of these efforts be geared toward entertainment, which isn't in conflict with education. Now, how do you make then something boring, well, not boring, but something not quite as engaging as history, for example, be fun through gameplay? Well, there was actually a game designer back in the 80s, I think. His name was Mark LeBlanc, in which he proposed that whenever you are trying to design a game, it's not very useful to design it in terms of, oh, I want our players just to have fun or to have engaging gameplay, because these words are kind of meaningless. How would you even define fun? For example, the kind of fun that you experience in a first person shooter game is not the exact same experience that you have in a role playing game or a platformer. They are entertaining, sure, but in order to truly understand and penetrate your audience, to make them even more engaged with what you're showing them, you have to be very specific about which type of fun you're trying to convey through your game. So that's why this game designer came up with a very interesting way to classify the different types of fun. And that's mainly what we are at our indie game studios called Picasso Games, also known as Inmertual. We're doing to design a game based around the fall of the Aztec Empire. We selected that very interesting period of history to build a whole new world, a whole new experience, and it's been a crazy ride all the way. It's been a crazy ride the last couple of years. But anyway, the types of fun that this game designer came up with, and we truly agree with all of his ideas, are the following. There are basically 8 different kinds of fun, and you can find them not only in video games, but in pretty much every single entertainment medium. The first would be the fun that deals with the sensation, that you are experiencing something that is interesting to the senses. Maybe you see a beautiful picture, or you are hearing music or some kind of sound effect that makes you feel calm, or in survival horror, a sound that alerts you that danger is near. This is something very fun for the senses. Next is the fun of fantasy, where you lose yourself into a whole a fictional world. And the type of fun that this focuses on is on make believe, that you are transported to a world very different from your own in order to have new grand adventures and experiences. Next comes narrative. Narrative, it's pretty much self-explanatory. You just take part in a very interesting story, but the advantage that video games offer compared to other entertainment mediums is that here the audience has an active role in the story that is being played along. You're not just watching, for example, a movie or reading a book where everything happens and you're just trying to catch up. In a video game, you take an active part in the story. You are the protagonist, you are the hero, or sometimes even the villain. You shape the world based on your choices, on your gameplay, on your skills. You are the one that is making everything happen. Next is challenge. This type of fun refers to developing the skills to surmount all different sorts of obstacles. I'm not sure if some of the people here are are fans of the Dark Souls series, but if you want a clear example of what a challenge type of fun is, just play one of those games. It's brutal. You're going to die, and if you love it, then congratulations. You've already mastered the challenge type of fun. And and another thing that is very linked with another type of fun with challenge is the fellowship type of fun, where the main focus of this is to build social interactions with other members of the community. It's the type of fun that you don't experience a game alone. You are not just a lone adventurer set in a massive game world. You are actually encouraged to build friendship relationships with other human beings. And this leads us to the next type of fun, which is the discovery. Once you are part of a new community, of a whole new world, then what's the next step? Explore it. There's a whole new world out there. There are lots of different new things up to you to figure out how everything works. And discovery is about that. Just you're in a very uncharted place. Go out there, see what's out there. And people who are very interested in this sort of fun are actually the ones that relate most with educational games, specifically educational games that are centered in history. In the past, we've consulted with several historians because even though we are Mexican and it's quite shameful, Mexico is even though we housed the Aztec Empire, Mexico is the country that knows the least about the Aztec Empire because unfortunately, due to many tragedies that have occurred throughout our history, most of the documents and studies that were done by the Aztec people, they were lost during the conquest. And our current government and historic institutions, they don't have the resources or even the interest in restoring all that information. Most of these things come from abroad, from institutions in the United States, in the United Kingdom. They have very passionate interest in discovering what happened with the Aztec Empire, and for them, this is the kind of discovery fun that most appeals to them. They want to know how this society worked, the ins and outs of their rituals, their gods, things like that. And this is mainly the type of fun that we are focusing whenever we're building a new gameplay mechanic or designing a new character. We are discovering alongside these historians, and we are translating all of this into our game. We're learning, for example, how the average Mexica warrior, Mexica is kind of another term, another more correct term to refer to the Aztecs. And these Mexica warriors, what we've mostly been told throughout movies, television, and even a couple of other games, is that they perform human sacrifices and they killed everyone no matter what. And this isn't true. Yes, they performed these kinds of sacrifices, but there was a deeper meaning to this that I just want to kill everybody. And we can translate that into a game that really explores a bit about their culture, that doesn't just tell you that, yeah, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. No, like everything, there's many gray areas in this period of history where not everyone was exactly the Spanish conquistadors, for example. They're mostly presented like these valorous adventurers that crossed the oceans and had a very had this notion of we're going to civilize this untamed part of the world. And history was not like that. Not all of the Spanish guys were like that, and not all of the Aztec were these savage warriors. It was a very interesting mix of different characters that we are once again emphasizing throughout our discovery type of fun by including all of this into our game. And well, sorry about that long explanation. The final two types of fun would be expression and submission. And expression is whenever the game allows you to make your own contributions to the game. Think of something like Minecraft, where you gather resources and then you can build whatever structure you want. The limit is your imagination. So that's a game that actually allows you to express yourself however you want. And finally, the submission type of game. Personally, that's the one that bothers me the most because submission is mostly about just grinding. Do the same repetitive task over and over again so that a game just becomes like an automated task. This is mostly popular on this mobile type of games where you have to, I don't know, maybe maintain a farm or build your own civilization, but there's really no challenge involved. It's just a matter of taking a few hours of your day to keep grinding on that task. Now, the interesting thing about these 8 types of fun is that they are not mutually exclusive. Any game that you want to analyze or build will probably include a mix of 4 to 5 different types of fun. I've already told you in our game, Dream of Darkness, centered about the fall of the Aztec Empire, we're focusing on the discovery type of fun, but we also, for example, want to tell an interesting story from the point of view of the Mexicas. That's a bit of narrative. We're also building it to be a survival horror type of game. So you have to be very skilled, or the challenge type of fun, to avoid enemies, maybe gather resources, and figure out what happened during this historic period. Because, like I said, most of the original records from this point of history were lost during the conflict.
I'll just jump in and interrupt you, Erasmo. Sorry to ask you just wrap up your opening remarks so we can keep moving. Super interesting, thank you. But a little bit longer, but just finish up for me if you can, thanks. Sorry, it's so interesting. I was just listening, but you can finish the sentence if you want.
Okay. Wakal, just to wrap it up then that's the whole point of what we're doing. We're incorporating lessons through history in order to insert them in a game that it's available and fun for the average consumer. And by doing this, we really believe that we can make a very special contribution to both gamers and historians.
Fantastic, thank you, and sorry to have to interrupt you, but I'm sure more of those ideas will be able to come out in the discussion, and I really look forward to hearing more about your game as well. But we'll move on, just to have an introduction to our last panelist as well, and some opening remarks before we get into that. So third up, Sin Vega is a games critic and former archive researcher with a special interest in unusual narratives, settings, and themes. She believes games have more to offer modern culture than is typically recognized and need more input than ever from designers and critics outside the usual sources. She currently writes several columns for Rock, Paper, Shotgun and tries to figure out where the last 6 hours went. I will pass it over to you, Sin. And I don't believe you have video at the moment because technology is the worst.
Yes, I am.
We can hear you.
Good. Well, it worked a few minutes ago, so that's live. Yes, thank you for that. Thank you as well to Erasmo and Adam. I'll get into it, but that was a really interesting start. So, as Tess said, I'm not really a historian. I've had some experience in archives, but my real area of expertise is games criticism. And I mostly cover games from smaller studios and individuals with a particular interest, as Tess said, in unusual themes and narratives, but I will play just about anything. I grew up playing on an Amiga, which I don't know if anyone had one, but if you had an Amiga, you just played everything. You just played whatever you could get your hands on. It didn't matter about genre, about setting, about anything. And I've just continued that with my life. And so the last 10 or 12 years in games has been really it's been a field day for me, as you can imagine, with so many indie games doing so many weird and wild things. I've written mostly for Rock, Paper, Shotgun, covering obscure older games that went overlooked or underappreciated. And later ran a column focusing exclusively on indie games, which I played over I can't remember the numbers, but it was over 1,000 games a year for 2 years. So one thing I've got to ask, don't ever do this. You will go insane. There's far too much out there for everyone to know about. I currently write columns and the occasional one-off freelance piece about strategy games, and not exclusively again, but primarily indie games or smaller games or niche games, and both of which are often a way to cover games set in or inspired by specific historical ideas or periods or even people. It's my long-standing belief that games are really desperately in need of works and criticism created by people with backgrounds and interests beyond games, and history is, to even call history a single thing seems absurd. It's such an absurdly huge subject, and consequently it's to me clearly the richest and most obvious source of all manner of ideas and stories, and yet few games proportionally really attempt to depict much beyond the same handful of regions and eras, or explore them with much depth or interest in authenticity, or even just alternative approaches to telling those stories or exploring those ideas. So I expect I'll be the junior by quite some way when it comes to history, but I've played enough games and I've dabbled in enough historical research to see some of that potential that we all see. I think we've been calling games the new, exciting, young, unique media for decades, so I'll try not to bang that drum, but I think games are particularly well suited to exploring historical ideas, settings, even in just a practical sense. Quite often you can do things in games that just are not possible, or they're considerably harder in other mediums. I think a lot of that potential is still untapped. Games have the luxury of a huge indie scene that is nonetheless very accessible in a way that, for example, films and TV don't. I mean, there's no good old games or itch equivalent for Netflix, for example. It's everything that you can really easily access in film has to come through a huge studio. That's just not the case in games. There are gatekeeping problems. There are problems of accessibility and distribution in terms of getting your games out there, but the tools are much more readily available than they used to be, and I think that's really exciting. And I think we're still in a really exciting time. I also think that players, broadly speaking, are more open than ever to new experiences. To even pretend that games have one audience is a ridiculously outdated view. There's no one person can possibly cover even a fraction of what is out there. The games audience is essentially everyone, and as far as for all practical purposes. And after decades defined by indie games, as you will know, there are just as many developers out there interested in providing those games, and it's bringing the two together. That's obviously one of the huge problems, and I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you that. And that is ideally where I step in. So the industry continues to have its issues, and some of those might even be getting worse. And games writing itself, or games coverage, is going through a hard time. But I really think there's still lots of cause to be optimistic. Almost nothing that I've covered in just the last few years would have been possible 10 or 15 years ago. And I think there are challenges ahead for everyone here, and everyone we represent. But I do think the next sort of 5-10 years could be a really interesting time for games. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All three of you, I'm very excited about the discussion that we're going to have over the next hour. And there's been applause flooding in for each of you in the chat as we've been going.